become part of a small group. And I hope many of you have already signed up for that. Dan talked to us about that this morning in worship, how important that is to be a part of a small group. And so we want to use Sunday morning a little bit more for really delivering content and ideas that, we're just not going to get that, from some of the resources that we typically use. And what a blessing we have to be situated so close to Princeton and Princeton Theological Seminary, to have the resources of the seminary right here in our own backyard. And you all know over the years the many different students who served us from the seminary doing field education. And at times, some of the faculty members who have come and done seminars, and we thought, wouldn't it be great if we were able to connect to the seminary in an even deeper way and have members of the faculty come and teach kind of an ongoing class. And so we began to reach out to different professors, and we contacted a couple of the not so good ones, and they weren't available. And then we met Heath Carter, who came highly recommended by Dr. Dave Davis, who was a classmate of mine and a pastor at Nassau Presbyterian. And he said Heath had done a class, I think you and Dave did something together that was just fabulous. He said, Heath Carter's the man. And so we reached out to Heath a number of months ago, and he had like 4 kids and a wife and all this stuff. And he goes, I would love to come to Allentown and do this. So we got the best guy. We got the number one. So this is Dr. Carter. I'm going to let him, he can tell you a little bit about himself. And he's going to lead us in a really interesting discussion about what's happening in the Big Tent churches and what's happening in the landscape of religion in the United States. Before that, let's pray. God, thank you so much for this immense opportunity to understand a little bit more about who you are and what you're doing in the world, and how your church, the Church of Jesus Christ, in all of its different manifestations, is the continuing presence of Jesus in the world today. As much as it is hard for us to believe, you are using us to bring about the building of your kingdom. You're using this community as one of thousands, millions of communities of people gathered across the world, across the ages, to proclaim the gospel. And sometimes we lose track of that, or we don't see it clearly. So we just want to say thank you for allowing us to be a small part of your great work of redemption. Thank you for Heath Carter, for calling him to serve as an educator. Thank you for his willingness to come here and be with us this morning and these next several weeks. Just bless him and use his words and ideas to stimulate our thinking about who you are and who we are in light of that. In Jesus' name, amen. Heath, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Right. Good morning, everyone. Let's see if I put this here. Will it still work? Yeah? That good? Great. So great to be with you all. It's not just my first time at this church, but it's my first time in the town of Allentown. And I was telling a few of you on the way in, so I'm a historian, and I just have so many questions. Just to drive in, it's such an evocative, just driving into town and all the buildings, and I mean, and even just rolling up to the church here, and what a historic place this is, back to 1720. Wow. So I'd love to, I hope, we'll be together for a month, which I'm thrilled about. I love when we get to spend a little more time together, rather than just doing a one-off. You guys kind of get to know one another. And I'd love to, I really want to get to know the story of this church and this town. And I was already asking some questions about how things around here have changed over time. Things don't always stay the same. And so I just felt invited into all these questions about the past as I rolled into town today. I'm Heath Carter, and I thought I would just start, since you don't know me, with a few words of introduction. This is my family. Oh, whoa, we're already, there we go. There we go. That's my family. I've got 4 boys, and I'm married. My spouse also works at Princeton Seminary. This is Isaiah, my oldest, is 15, 3, and Sam are 11, and James is 9. Work at Princeton Seminary, which many of you will know of. I don't know if you've seen our mission, which is to basically prepare leaders for the church and for society. I've been at the seminary for, this is my 4th year. Before this, I taught for 7 years at a Lutheran university right outside of Chicago, Valparaiso University. It's been a really exciting time to come to Princeton Seminary. There's a lot happening at the seminary right now in terms of the faculty. So, I mean, I hope you all will get to have some of my colleagues out here too in the months ahead. There's really kind of a generational transition happening on our faculty. And part of what is exciting to me about that is as we'll kind of get into today, the landscapes of kind of American life and American Christianity are in really rapid motion. So what does it mean to live out this mission today? What does it mean to live out this mission going forward? It's going to require us to really think a lot and to pray a lot about kind of what God is calling us to do, because our sense is, I think already we know we can't keep doing what we've been doing. It's not going to work if we're going to continue to kind of live our mission out faithfully going forward. So we got a big topic on our hands this month. The title of our series, Blessed Be the Ties That Bind, the Promise and Perils of a Big Tent Faith in a Nation Divided. Part of what I want to do today and at the end of the series is to think carefully about kind of right now, and to think a little bit about the context that this congregation, the many congregations that are our neighbors in this region, the context that we're immersed in and wrestling with and witnessing within. What does it look like to sustain a Big Tent faith in a nation divided? But I also want us to learn a little bit today, but then definitely the next couple of weeks, we're going to go back into some history. And sometimes when I talk about history, where I just say I'm a historian, people are like, uh-oh, did not like history in school. And we all have our history traumas with our various teachers in school growing up. I did not take a history class in college because I did not like my history teacher in high school. So if that is you, you're good. You're in good company. But here's what I got interested in history kind of later in my academic journey. And I think part of what I hope over the course of our time together, in addition to the substantive questions that we'll talk about related to the theme, I'd love for you to be a little bit more in love with history at the end of this month together. And the reason I say that, it's not just because I am a historian and I'm hoping to get more people into my line of work here or something like that, but because I really think that history matters for the church. Sometimes we think of history as being kind of a sidelight to Bible theology, and obviously Bible and theology are at the center of the church's life. But there's also really good grounds, there's really good reasons why history has long been a part of seminary curriculum, long been a part of the church's life. And it also comes kind of straight out of the Bible, this idea that the clouds of witnesses that have gone before us, we have a lot to learn from them. So that's one reason to love history. But the other thing that I would say, and I find this as I talk to congregations around the country, is we're all already historians. So you're already a historian. You already have a sense of the past that you're working off of, your own past, the past of this church, the past of this community, the past of this nation. And one of the gifts of history is that it's a testing ground for our own sort of ideas about the past. When we run up against kind of the work that historians do, it can be a way sometimes history and memory line up, and sometimes they don't. And it can be really interesting to explore those times when history and memory don't line up. And we can talk a little bit about that, I think, this month. Last thing I'll say, just by way of beginning, is that I do think that history can be a kind of footing for tough conversations. It can offer us kind of some shared footing for tough conversations. One of my deepest animating convictions is that the world really should know we are Christians by our love, which means we got to find ways to hang together in the midst of even the toughest conversations. I think that's a key part of a faithful witness. And that's something our society is not very good at right now, hanging together in tough conversations. We're living in an age where kind of big tents, if you, so to speak, across society are under a lot of pressure, or collapsing even. But it seems to me, in coming in and talking to your pastors, that this is a place that has managed to sustain a big tent, even amid these kind of broader pressures. So I guess part of what I want to say up front as we kind of move into this theme and these challenging themes in many ways, I want to be totally clear up front that this is for you, no matter sort of what your experiences are or where you're coming from or how you vote. My hope is to really think together about what our faith has to say about the kind of congregations and the kind of communities that we're building together. So if you have any questions, obviously I'm happy to take them at the end of each week, but also hang around and chat after if you want to talk at greater length. I want to get you all right sort of into the conversation right at the beginning. So I'd love if you take a moment and just talk to your neighbor. What, in your view, just kind of initial thoughts, initial impressions, what are your thoughts on kind of the state of American democracy? What are your thoughts on the state of American Christianity? I want to think about those two themes together a little bit today. How's American democracy doing? How's American Christianity doing? But I love if you just turn to your neighbor, share a thought, share a hope, share a concern, whatever, wherever you want to go with it. Just and we'll come back together, and I'll ask. Not everyone's going to have to share, but if a couple people want to share how we can do that. So take a couple minutes to just talk to your neighbor.
No small questions in this series.
Take maybe another minute and we'll come back together. All right. Let's come back together. Anyone want to share any thoughts on these overwhelmingly large questions? American democracy, American Christianity. What's kind of what comes to mind for you? Yeah. Tell me your name. I hope I'll try to learn names. Yeah. Simone. Okay.
So I'm taking a history course right now.
Yep.
It's like my gen ed.
Yep.
And I'm going through the Christian party, the Roman Catholics, and I was saying to her, like, history's kind of repeating itself again, but in a different way. We're just not crusades and wars and trying to punch people in for Christianity.
Yeah.
She kind of said, like, virtues, like we Christians or the church is only the virtues, and it's like we're kind of no, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to repeat, but I can pass. Yeah, I was going to let her finish, and I'll try to sum up, and then yeah.
Just basically, history repeating something in a different way. And I feel like this generation kind of like steering hard on trying to keep that life alive.
Yeah.
Especially since democracy, I think the president's Catholic. I'm like, well, what are people thinking about that?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, the president and how Christianity is kind of declining. How it's kind of certain on how.
Yeah. Yeah, so Simone says that it feels like history is repeating itself in a different way. There's a little bit of a sense of anxiety about kind of maybe both democracy and Christianity being a little bit at risk or in kind of in a place of struggle. Yeah. What's your name?
My name is Ann.
Ann, great.
What I was trying to say was that I feel as though the sort of intersection of faith and society used to be, or seemed to be, virtues, you know?
Yeah.
We all held the same sort of passion and patience and courage and generosity. And now it seems like if you want to find those people, go to church. You know, I mean, it's harder on the outskirts. And I was also saying that I felt that, you know, the generation that Simone is in, it's shaping up to be something exciting to me. You know, we've taken away sort of a lot of things from this generation. We grew up with terrorism, we grew up with all kinds of things that I didn't have to deal with. And it seems stronger to me. It seems stronger. And really a people are fighting.
So I hear both a little bit of anxiety, a little bit of hope there. Anne says that it felt like in the past, maybe there was a larger overlap between the virtues you would find in our wider society and the virtues you would find at church. And now it feels like you want to find those virtues, you got to go to church. But she also feels a lot of hope about the up and coming Simone's generation, the up and coming generation. Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah.
So I'm Jeff.
Jeff, yeah.
We didn't get to the faith part of it. We were talking about democracy.
Yeah.
And we were saying sort of the sad thing that we're in at the moment is that everything has become rather tribalized.
Yeah.
And if you have a belief, you can always find people who will support what it is. And then you begin not to trust the people who are next to you, who don't believe the same thing that you have.
Yeah.
You change, at least the older people, from a time when you had neighbors, neighborhoods, and you could trust people to come through for you. If you had a hard time, somebody bring you a meal. If you needed your kids to get a ride to school, someone would pick up your kids and go for it. These days, you don't know if you can trust those people with your kids, and you'll certainly starve to death when you're over there.
We were also saying as we see these groups separate and not supporting each other, they're also just not even listening to each other, not even taking a moment to just listen. Whether you agree or disagree, it doesn't matter. Just not even taking that time to listen.
Yeah. And what was your name?
Melissa.
So yeah, Jeff and Melissa are kind of pinpointing a declining trust in our neighbors and a sense of people sort of retreating into their own communities or echo chambers a little bit and not listening or learning from others who have a different experience. What else? jump in? Yeah.
I think,
What's your name?
I'm Anne-Marie.
Emery.
I think, there's great communication breakdown
Mm.
amongst the generations.
Yeah.
When we grew up, you had to wait for your information. It wasn't instantaneous 24/7, and the information that a lot of people get isn't accurate, or
Mm.
even know if it's accurate, and consequently, people hold and going forward with inaccurate information, and then it just kind of festers and snowballs and goes down the hill. And plus, I feel the young generation now has only grown up with technology. A lot of times they don't talk to people, they only text, they communicate that way, and they don't see how their actions affect people by the look on their face or their body language or that, and then that causes a further breakdown.
Yeah. Emery, right?
Yeah.
Emery, yeah, so maybe some generational dynamics and maybe lack of trust or understanding between generations, and in addition to maybe having a hard time trusting neighbors, distrusting experts or the information that we felt like at one point was reliable, and now it feels like there's lots of wrong information that people are relying on. Yes. Nancy, yes.
I think that the other thing is going on is just the term democracy.
Yeah.
So language as time maybe that democracy has to meant the same thing,
Mm.
much more broadly. Today, everybody's trying to find what democracy, same thing as Christianity.
Yeah.
I think that's right. I think change.
Mm. Yeah.
We're trying to co-opt that language.
Yeah. Yeah. It's Nancy, right? Nancy. Yeah. So just the idea that even like the terminology doesn't mean the same thing to everyone. People doesn't raise the same idea, right? Democracy, Christianity, these kind of basic terms, we don't mean the same thing by them in the way that maybe we once did. Last yeah.
I wrote touched on Christian and its rise.
Yeah.
How it's, politics has moved into all areas of our lives where it once was.
Yeah. And what's your name?
My name's Anna.
Anna, so it wants to highlight kind of the increasingly prominent role of Christian nationalism in kind of public life. And we can talk more about what that is and whatnot as we go through the series. But I think a lot of what you all have pinpointed, clearly been doing your reading, and I mean, these are things that you've articulated, widely shared concerns, and concerns that I think across the nation and really across all sorts of lines that divide, we do have at least in common some concerns, and I think you've named a number of them. I want to just spend a little bit of time today thinking about these contexts and kind of laying out some of the context. Some of the context I think is really challenging, and so hang with me because I'm not going to end with. And part of why I'm interested in going back is I think we can find also some hope and some ideas, some creativity in the past. So that's where I'm moving, but I want to move through kind of some of these contemporary challenges toward that hope. So hang with me. One of the things that you all talked about that is really a widely shared concern is kind of polarization, right? This idea of people feeling that we are more and more divided. We've seen these kind of scenes of violent conflict in the streets. The truth is, and this is one of the gifts of history, right? History can remind us that we have often grappled with similar problems in the past. In fact, we fought a civil war in this country. So we have been more divided in the past than we are right now. But it's hard to take a lot of comfort in that when we know that more than half of young Americans today feel that democracy in the United States is in trouble. or failed. And more than a third believe that there could be another civil war in their lifetime. That's a really sobering possibility that folks are grappling with. Part of the reason for that is that in recent years, we know that across party lines, Americans have, as you rightly pointed out, where they once saw neighbors, now see enemies. And what we know is that, Republicans and Democrats alike, as they look across kind of the partisan lines, see the members of the other party as not just wrong on key issues, but as a serious threat to the nation's very well-being. These numbers are actually, I think this data is a little bit dated, it's from 2014, but so these trends have only continued. I couldn't find a good graph, but the survey data shows that more than 70% of people in each party regard the folks in the other party as threats. So part of this also relates, if I can get my thing, to a kind of perennial, it seems, or increasingly low trust in government. Again, across party lines, that it wasn't that long ago, in fact, in the lifetime of some folks in this room, that there was actually a lot of trust in the government. 50 years ago or so, some 77%, more than 3/4 of Americans trusted the government to do the right thing just about always or most of the time. Whereas today that number is less than a quarter. We could, talk for many sort of hours about the deeper sources of all this, and we'll get into some of it in the weeks ahead. But part of what's really important, and part of what I think, for this congregation, as we grapple with the contemporary context, is to know that these concerns about American democracy also do really run through our churches. And I mean, part of what we know, sociologists of religion have done studies that show that, back in the day, a church like this one, churches like this one all over the country, and we can talk about, I was talking to Pastor Steve about how I think in some ways you all are a fascinating exception to some of these contemporary trends, and I'm eager to learn more from you. In general, across the nation, a Presbyterian church in small towns across the country would have been a place where people came together across all different other lines because they valued their Presbyterianism, they valued their denominational identity, and that brought people together across other kinds of lines. But what we know is that in recent decades, those denominational identities have faded in importance, and other kinds of cultural and political identities have become much more salient for American Christians. So increasingly, churches where you would go to church on a Sunday morning and sit in the pew next to people who voted very differently than you, that happens less and less often today. Again, I'm curious and I'm interested in the ways in which this church may be a kind of exception to that. But in general, part of what we know is that the divisions within American churches have themselves become deeply politically and culturally divided. Those denominational identities just aren't holding up in the way that they did 50 years ago. Part of this is, and so American democracy, right? There's some real challenges. American Christianity has challenges of its own. And we can measure this in all sorts of ways. Just in the last 15 years, the percentage of US adults who say they pray on a daily basis has dropped really substantially. And the same is true for the percent, still having a hard time with this. Here we go. They consider religion very important in their lives. Part of what you'll note, and that's relevant to this congregation too, is that to the extent that we see kind of declining faith, trust, interest in the churches, it's especially on the kind of Protestant side of the spectrum. There's complicated reasons for this. I think Catholic numbers have been bolstered by immigration. But the number of US adults who strongly identify as Protestant is on kind of a precipitous decline. Now, it used to be that people said, well, this is just the liberal churches that are declining, and it's because of their liberal theology. But what we've studies have shown, and kind of as these trends continue to play themselves out, what we know is that across lines, sort of across ideological lines, conservative, liberal, it doesn't matter, there is declining affiliation with Protestant churches. So I don't know if you've heard of the nuns, not N-U-N-S, but N-O-N-E-S. This is one of the big trends in American life right now. The nuns, anyone know what the nuns are?
Talk about it in church.
Yeah.
No affiliation.
Yeah, no affiliation. These are folks, and they're really, it's an interesting, we need to know a lot more about the nuns. And I think for a church like this, and really for congregations across the country, the nuns, any congregation that's interested in witness and evangelism and reaching out and growing, becoming a bigger part of what's going on in your community, I mean, we need to know more about the nuns. These are not, for the most part, people who are sort of diehard atheists. That is not the nuns' story. They are people who don't name a religious affiliation. So they won't, they're surveyed and they're asked, do you identify with a denomination or do you identify with a church? And they say, I identify with none, right? But the reality is, and as we kind of get to know these folks, I think the more we've studied them, the less we have clarity about what exactly is going on with these folks. In part, they are part of a much larger trend in American life, which is that young people Simone's age, people younger than me, kind of these rising up and coming generations, do not have the same relationship to all different kinds of institutions that their parents and especially their grandparents had. So back in the day, in the post-war period, really belonging happened through institutions, right? It happened through churches, big time. It happened through the Lions Club, the Rotary. It happened through all different kinds of civic institutions that for one reason or another, and there's lots of thought and theories about why this is, do not have the same appeal to millennials and Gen X. So part of what we know is that, I don't know how well you can see this chart, but there's a major generational component to the nuns. So you can see here that the share of the generation that belong, what it would be classified as a nun, is going up on the left here. So basically, it's in generational order. The oldest generation, the greatest generation, is the least likely to be a nun. Silent generation, then the boomers, then Gen X, millennials are at the top and going up. We don't have Gen Z on here, but they are up there with the millennials. So there's a huge, Anne-Marie, I think, was the one who pinpointed the generational. There's huge generational dynamics at work right now in kind of the story of contemporary Christianity in the United States. One analyst recently noted, and again, I think for any congregation, this is really important to reckon with. The younger you are, so quote, the younger you are, the less likely you are to believe in God, the less likely you are to describe yourself as spiritual, the less likely you are to regularly pray. Americans ages 18 to 29, only 21% report going to church at least weekly, 27% pray daily, and 31% say that they believe in God as described in the Bible. Part of what I think is one of the other pieces, so if there's an institutional piece, just kind of general faltering faith in institutions among young people, there's no question that when it comes to churches, that the nature of churches' public engagement in public life, public questions, has played a significant role in kind of hastening the disenchantment of many young people. This is a brand new data that came out just this week from Pew. And this is kind of the end of my grim context, and then we're going to move into the hopeful part. If you look at the future right now, if things, and they've got 4 different scenarios that they kind of played out here. We are rapidly heading, and this is not a surprise if you've been following kind of the numbers. We're rapidly heading toward a nation in the probably in the course of my lifetime that will be less than 50% Christian, which is really quite historic.
in really an unprecedented sort of development. Oh, going the wrong way again. Let me see if I can. And that the nuns in that same span of time could end up being the majority. So part of what, I think you can look at this data, and I think, part of what you can wonder is, wow, are we just living through the decline of American democracy, through the decline of American Christianity? But I think, and this is one of the things I want to hold on to, even in the midst of the grim data, if I can actually get to this slide. It's funny, the buttons switch every time. I'm just gonna, no, I'm going the wrong way. It's so funny. And every time I push them, it goes a different way. Let me try again. No? Okay, that's back. Okay, here we go. This seems promising. There we go. God gave us not a spirit of fear. I think part of what I really believe, part of what is exciting to me about being at the seminary this time, in a moment of where it looks like things are sort of grim, is that I think the truth is that God is with us in the midst of all these challenges. And God has been with us, when those numbers looked really good and when those institutional affiliations were really high. God was with us then too. So I look at this stuff and I feel like it's daunting, but there's also an opportunity for Princeton Seminary. There's an opportunity for Allentown Presbyterian Church in the midst of these numbers. And that opportunity is just to be faithful and to follow God's lead in these times and to be a light in your community. And part of this, the setup for this series that I want to take you through, and I think you might have seen this in a blurb that may have been circulated with you. As Presbyterians, the Presbyterian Church, we are part of a broader stream of American Christianity called the Mainline. You heard of the Mainline? Is that familiar? Anyone want to give a guess at how would you describe the Mainline? What does that mean to you? Anyone?
It used to be the largest churches of the Protestant faith.
Yeah.
Episcopal, Presbyterian, Baptist.
Yeah.
Those five, I don't know, somebody told me I left out.
Yeah.
Those five.
Yeah, it's historically the Mainline has been really kind of the beating heart of American Protestantism. These are denominations, including the Presbyterian Church, Episcopal Church, Methodist Church, and more that have been really key to kind of shaping not just Christianity, but also shaping American democracy. And part of what I think, and what I'm excited to do with you all, to dip back a little bit, to go back about a generation or two ago, starting next week, and to think about the life of this tradition. And an earlier moment in this tradition's life in particular, when it really was, in a way that's just not quite true in the same way today, but we don't know what the future holds. A time when it was the beating heart of national Christian, democratic, etc. life. When you think about the Mainline, so part of what's interesting is that part of what I want to do with you all is to kind of reframe the identity of the Mainline and to do it in a way that I think is more true to the history. In my field, over the last generation, when people have talked about the Mainline, they've often just used it synonymously with liberal. So there's been the evangelical churches and then the mainline churches. The evangelicals are conservative and the mainline is liberal. Part of what has worked about this story, and there's some things about it that are not wrong, but part of what's worked about it, now I'm doing something here. Sorry, y'all, I'm a technological mess. What did I do? Hello? I don't know. Just went out. Give it to the young person. This is what we have to do. Yeah. Just go ahead. Okay, I'll keep moving. Part of what the story that's been told in my field. So I'm an American historian. I study Christianity in the United States, and the way that the story of American Protestantism has been told over the last generation is a story about a polarized faith. Basically, that sometime long ago, in basically about 100 years ago, conservative and liberal Protestants got a big divorce, basically. That's the way we've told the story for the last generation. That, let me see here, I've actually got a couple of slides on this. That sometime, like back in the late 1800s, there were these big debates over the Bible, where some people wanted to hold on to the authority of the Bible and other people were ready to let it go. Big debates about evolution, Darwinism, where some people were like, Christianity and evolution can be reconciled, and other people said Christianity and evolution are two different visions of creation and could never be reconciled. And then debates over kind of the shape of industrializing society. This is the explosion in Haymarket Square. I don't know if you know about this, but these big fights over kind of the labor movement and capitalism in the late 19th century. So the story goes, this story that I want to trouble a little bit for you this month, is that, it started way back in the late 1800s that people started to disagree about the Bible. They started to disagree about science. They disagreed about politics. That the disagreement just got worse and worse. That D.L. Moody, so he was a big revivalist in the late 1800s. He had been friends with everybody. He had a simple gospel that he preached about saving people, getting more and more people into the lifeboat. But he was friends with liberals. He was friends with conservatives. In contrast with Billy Sunday, who you can kind of see here, he was a successor to Moody, also a revival preacher, preached to huge crowds. What was he liked to fight, and he liked to argue. Thank you so much. Are we working? Oh, beautiful. Okay. So the story is that late 1800s, rising division. People like Billy Sunday who are just here to fight, and they're not interested in being friends across the lines that divide. They just want to fight. I don't know if you've seen the film Inherit the Wind. Yeah, this is like the classic narrative. Okay, the classic narrative is starting in the late 1800s. The polarization that you know today was already at work back then, right? And it really comes to a head in the 1920s in this very famous trial, the Scopes monkey trial. Anyone know? Remember, what's this about? Who remembers? You can see why it's a good story because it's a good story. But I want to come back and
It's about teaching evolution.
Yeah.
Public school.
Yeah.
And Clarence Darrow, the great liberal.
Yeah.
Defended teaching it. I think it was in the South in Tennessee.
Yeah.
And so then William Jennings Bryan, the Cross of Gold and everything else, the great man of the people, came and defended the people's right not to listen to this trashy idea that man rose from the apes.
Yeah.
Just
got it. This is, it is like great storytelling. You're a historian already for sure. The classic showdown between, this iconoclastic, secular, liberal lawyer, Clarence Darrow, and then William James Bryan, who's a very complicated figure, by the way. Bryan is in the evolution debates a real conservative, right? But he had run for president 4 times, and as a populist, as someone who's a defender of the common person. But this trial, which riveted the attention of the nation, and became kind of, and there was at certain trials, every few decades, there's a trial that kind of captures the attention of the nation. This one captured the attention of the nation, and the story goes that Bryan won the trial, which he did. He won the fight over teaching evolution in these Tennessee schools. but he lost the cultural battle. That's the narrative. And Brian actually died a few days after this trial concluded, and was, even though he won, just like ridiculed in the press by people like H.L. Mencken, who just made fun of him as kind of a dim-wit, fundamentalist who has, in contrast with the cosmopolitan Darrow. The idea, and what people in my field have been saying this for a generation, is that this is the moment when Protestantism, which had already been disagreeing, conservatives and liberals had already been disagreeing, this is the moment when the divorce happened and they just walked separate paths from then on there. So to the extent that you feel like, Christians are divided today, it just goes all the way back to, the 1920s. I think that's really wrong. And that's part of what I want to argue kind of over the course of the next couple of weeks, is that it's a fun story, it's a dramatic story, but the real truth is messier. Part of what I want to sort of argue the next couple of weeks is that the Mainline, which often has been thought of as the liberal branch versus the evangelicals or fundamentalists as the conservative branch, part of what I want to sort of argue with you is that the Mainline, for generations after this, really fun fight between Clarence Darrow and William James Bryan, the Mainline is this huge, unwieldy Big Tent. And it is a really big tent. Liberals and conservatives, people across lines of race and class and region that are hanging together. And they're hanging together around two big projects, okay? And this is what I want to track the next couple of weeks, and where I think that there's stuff for us to learn today, right? The thing that holds the Big Tent together for a long time after the end of the Scopes trial, two things. One, witness to Christian unity, a belief that it's important for Christians to hang together. That was a big source of Big Tent faith for much of the 20th century. So this idea that there's something important when Christians hang together, it's a witness to the world. Okay, so one driving fact is that pull for Christian unity. The other big pull is a pull for a more just society. And so those Protestants who disagree about so much, we're going to get into this next week, they have so many things that they disagree about, but they're all working together because at some level they're all committed, amidst all their disagreements, to Christian unity and a more just society. And so those are the things that keep them holding together. And so part of what I want to do, there's a whole story that's a fun story that I can tell you sometime about Princeton Seminary's role in all this drama too. Princeton Seminary famously is another big battle. A bunch of our faculty left in the end of the 1920s, and this is also painted as part of this story of this big public divorce. But the fight between those who stayed and those who left the seminary in the late 1920s wasn't actually conservative versus liberal. It was Big Tent versus small tent. That was the nature of the fight. The small tent people lost and left. They believed that conservatives and liberals and people who disagreed could not coexist in the church. And so they left. The Big Tent people who stayed at Princeton Seminary were real conservative, actually. But they believed that people they disagreed with were still Christians and still people that they wanted to work together. So that's my sense, is that this mainline thing that this church has been a part of for generations, for much of its life, has been a big tent. And this is where I think, for those of us who find ourselves, I'm going to wind down and leave a little time for conversation here. As we find ourselves in a society that is seemingly kind of coming apart at the seams, and in churches that so often are part of that. Part of what I want to do as we move into the next couple of weeks and looking at the past of our own tradition, I think we'll find resources for where we find ourselves today. We'll find in the stories of those faithful witnesses who have gone before us resources for navigating really tough divides. And the truth is, there have been really tough divides for a long time.
the Mainline, the Presbyterians, Christian folks have navigated those divides very differently in different moments. And one worry right now is that we're just kind of part of this larger coming apart. But I think in our past and in our tradition, we can find resources for sticking together. And that's kind of what I hope to do the next couple of weeks, is to go back into the past. The next week, I want to talk about the civil rights era. Huge era, lots of divides, lots of controversial questions. And I want to talk about the Mainline's history around civil rights, which is a history in which we can both take pride in major achievements, and we can also learn from some mistakes. And this is part of what, I hope 50 years from now, when people write our story, hopefully they will have a kind of generosity in the way they write our own story, and be able to talk about the things that we did well, the ways that we were faithful in the midst of challenging times, and also the ways that they can learn from our mistakes, because we also are making mistakes. And so that's what I hope we can do together the next couple of weeks. I think do I have 5 minutes for questions? I forget what time we're supposed to be over. I got 1 minute. 1 minute for questions, sorry. Okay, I'll take 2 minutes. I'll take every minute I get. Thanks, I forgot, 9:45. So yeah, any closing thoughts or questions, things that you want to think about together in the weeks ahead? Yeah. Did he? See, I love, I'm going to learn from you all about, I told you at the beginning, I'm like, oh, really? Do you know any more about that? Do you know any more about that? About when, like, what he talked about, or?
I can research it.
Can you? What's your name? Liz, if you could research that, I would love to know about that. I'm writing a book right now in which Brian's the center of one of my chapters. So I'd love to have a local connection.
We've had some very prominent.
Yeah.
He was a Presbyterian, wasn't Billy Sunday?
Yeah. Oh yeah. That Brian's Presbyterian, grew up Presbyterian. There's, part of what I think is fun for me about coming here to do this series is this is a historic church that has been here through all of these different configurations. So all the more reason to kind of think carefully about the past and what we can learn from it. So I'm really thankful for your attention and time, and look forward to being on this journey with you the next few weeks. Thank you so much.
The 1960s.
Yeah.
Is not really past for us.
Yeah. We're going even a little bit earlier than 60s next year. We're going back into the 40s, which I know is still pretty recent. Maybe let's have that. Maybe I can close with just a prayer. God, thank you for this time to be together and to learn from one another. God, thank you for this congregation, for its long history of faithfulness in divided times. God, be with us on this journey together these next few weeks, and be with each person in this room as they go into another busy week ahead. Thank you for your presence among us. Amen. Amen. Thank you so much.